States had attacked the Libyan mainland. We begin at the Pentagon with ABC's Steve Shepard.
Carrier-based U.S. Navy fighters came under fire this morning from two long-range SA-5 Soviet-built missiles based at Sirte on the central Libyan coast. They both missed by a distance of miles. Shortly thereafter, two Libyan MiG-25s were intercepted by U.S. fighters as the MiGs approached the U.S. fleet. They were driven off without a shot being fired. That was followed by another launch of two SA-5s from Sirte, which again missed. That was enough hostile fire for U.S. forces, and a counterstrike was ordered. An A-7 attack aircraft off the USS Saratoga fired two high-speed anti-radiation missiles. The missiles, designed to home in on enemy radar, destroyed the radar units controlling the SA-5s in Sirte, effectively eliminating 12 missile batteries. There are no reports about casualties at the missile site. There is some concern about possible Soviet losses. Russians were not believed to be operating the missiles, but have been in the area conducting training. At about the same time as the attack on Sirte, an A-6 attack plane off the USS America fired two Harpoon anti-ship missiles at a Libyan fast attack missile patrol boat. The boat was hit, caught fire, and was last seen sinking. There were no apparent survivors. Another missile boat, this one operating out of Benghazi, was also attacked and damaged, but just how seriously has not been determined. There were no U.S. losses of any kind in today's action. In Washington late this afternoon, Secretary of Defense Weinberger strongly defended U.S. actions.
We were fired on and hostile acts committed by very lethal missiles while we were in international waters by Libyan forces, and we have responded.
At the time of today's operation, U.S. ships and planes were operating south of what Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi calls his line of death, a boundary enclosing the Gulf of Sidra. Gaddafi claims the Gulf is Libyan territory and has promised to defend it. The U.S. and most other countries say the Gulf is international water and that everyone has a right to sail there. 6:15 p.m. Eastern Time last night. The USS Yorktown, a powerful Aegis anti-aircraft cruiser, has been tracking a Libyan patrol boat on its computerized radar. The boat, a French-built combatant like this one, carries sophisticated anti-ship missiles. It has been operating well north of Colonel Gaddafi's line of death, outside the disputed Gulf of Sidra, and is headed toward the U.S. fleet. The Yorktown fires two Harpoon missiles and the Libyan vessel is destroyed. There is no sign of the crew, which normally numbers about 27 men. 6:54 p.m. Two A-7 attack planes fire HARM missiles at the same Libyan SA-5 missile site near Sirte, attacked by U.S. forces earlier in the day. While no Libyan missiles have been fired since early afternoon, the attack is ordered to knock out a tracking radar that had apparently been repaired following the earlier U.S. raid. The SA-5 batteries are again taken out of action. 1:07 this morning. Two A-6 attack planes fire missiles at a Libyan-owned, Russian-built Nanuchka missile patrol boat. Once again, U.S. planes are successful. The Nanuchka is last seen dead in the water and blazing. Despite such combat, Defense Secretary Weinberger made it clear today that the U.S. is not in any haste to leave the area.
And, our activity is continuing. The exercises above and below and around the 32-30 line.
Good evening. Now that the military action in the Gulf of Sidra off the coast of Libya is over, Colonel Gaddafi has declared victory. Well, it shouldn't be a surprise that if you'd been in Libya today and you hadn't heard any other version of events, you might have thought that Libya had taken on the United States and won. ABC's Charles Glass is in Tripoli.
Colonel Gaddafi walked onto the balcony in front of his military headquarters like a conquering hero. He raised his hand and the crowd, mostly members of his armed forces, cheered what they saw as Gaddafi's moment of triumph. He used today, the anniversary of the 1970 closing of British military bases here, to give his version of the week's events. He said the American fleet ended its maneuvers 2 days ahead of schedule because of Libyan military pressure. He said no American warships crossed his so-called line of death into the Gulf of Sidra. He claimed Libya shot down 3 American F-14 warplanes, saying Libya had allowed the planes into Libyan airspace in order to ambush them. He said 6 American pilots were now being eaten by fish in the Gulf of Sidra. But he contradicted himself, saying the Libyan Navy permitted American helicopters to rescue the U.S. casualties, but he added the U.S. fleet did not permit Libyan ships to rescue Libyan sailors, admitting for the first time the U.S. had hit a Libyan naval vessel. He told the crowd that 2 American missiles were fired near the town of Sirte on Monday, but claimed one exploded without causing damage and the other didn't explode at all. He said he would give the unexploded missile to the Soviet Union for examination. Then some men led a cow into the crowd, and without warning, the defenseless animal was slaughtered. faltered. On its hide was written the name Reagan. The American and Libyan versions of the last week's events differ sharply, but there can be no doubt that Colonel Gaddafi's account is believed here just as much as President Reagan's is in the United States. Charles Glass, ABC News in Tripoli, Libya.
For the second time this week, Americans have been the victims of a terrorist attack in Europe. This time, the target was a nightclub in West Berlin, a favorite of American soldiers. A bomb exploded there overnight. 2 people were killed, one of them an American. Scores were wounded. Don Cladstrip now with our report.
Little was left of the West Berlin disco, devastated by a bomb while the club was packed with several hundred persons. Over 150 were injured, about 70 of them American servicemen. 1 U.S. soldier and a young Turkish woman were killed. Authorities speculate that someone planted the bomb under a table near the dance floor. Witnesses painted a scene of terror and chaos when it exploded.
It was very panicky. People walking around bleeding, in pain.
The injured were rushed to more than a dozen hospitals. The more serious were medevaced to a U.S. Army hospital in West Germany. Today, American Ambassador Richard Burt toured the scene of destruction. He minced no words, calling the bombing
an unbelievably cowardly act and an unbelievably barbaric act.
Security at U.S. military installations was immediately beefed up. Vehicles were checked closely for possible bombs. German police manned a telephone hotline to help callers locate friends and relatives. Despite several calls claiming responsibility for the blast, it is clear following Wednesday's bombing of a TWA jetliner that officials think an outside government could be partly to blame.
At this stage, we'll only talk about state-sponsored terrorism.
In the aftermath of the weekend bombing in West Berlin, the State Department today pointed a finger once again at Colonel Gaddafi.
There have been numerous indications that over a period of time, Libyan agents were targeting American and U.S. facilities, including surveillance, as possible preparation for potential attacks. We have suspicions that this bombing, that is to say, the bombing in Berlin, is part of that pattern.
ABC News has learned that the link between the Berlin bombing and Libya is now significantly more than just a suspicion. U.S. intelligence sources say that after the bombing, there were messages from Libya to its embassy in East Berlin, which indicated clear knowledge of details of the terrorist attack, and which in essence offered praise for a job well done. There was also substantial communication between Libya and its East Berlin embassy before the attack, enough to cause the U.S. to express its concern to both East Germany and the Soviet Union last week about Libyan activities in East Germany, but not enough to predict definitively what the target would be.
President Reagan telegraphed his punch today, making it clear to a meeting of newspapers